The distant crack of a rifle echoes through Trinity River Valley. Eleanor Wilson drops to the floor of her cabin, heart thundering against her ribs. The third shot this week. They're getting bolder now, no longer content with threats whispered. At the trading post, no longer hiding their intentions behind false smiles. Through a gap in the roughly hewn logs, she watches Victor Dawson pace at the edge of her property, rifle glinting in the autumn sun. His message is clear. A woman, alone, has no business keeping a gold claim. But Eleanor didn't cross a continent, didn't bury her husband in rocky soil, didn't weather isolation and grief to surrender what's rightfully hers. Not to Dawson, not to anyone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year is 1849. The pristine wilderness of Northern California trembles beneath the relentless assault of pick and shovel. Men from every corner of the earth converge on streams and valleys, transforming crystal waters to muddy veins as they tear into the earth, searching for gold. The fever of wealth has infected a nation, a mass migration that leaves families shattered, social orders upended, and ancient lands violated in mankind's eternal pursuit of fortune. The Trinity River winds through dense pine forests, its waters, once clear as the Sierra sky, now clouded with the silt of 1,000 desperate dreams. Here, where the mountains cast long shadows over narrow valleys, the concept of law exists only in memory. Here, in this untamed wilderness, strength determines ownership, and morality bends under the weight of gold fever. But sometimes, in the darkest moments of human greed, unexpected light emerges from the shadows. Eleanor Wilson never wanted gold. A dressmaker from Springfield, Illinois, with nimble fingers and a practical mind, she followed her husband Henry westward when consumption claimed his father's life, leaving him a modest inheritance and towering dreams. "Just enough to start fresh, Ellie," he'd promised, blue eyes bright with possibility. "California needs craftsmen more than it needs miners. We'll build something lasting while others chase dust." They purchased a plot of land along Pinecrest Gulch, a tributary of the Trinity River, intending to establish a sawmill. Henry had apprenticed under his father, a skilled carpenter, and saw more sustainable fortune in lumber than in the capricious promise of gold. The plot came with a small cabin, barely more than 4 walls and a roof. But Eleanor had transformed it with determined domesticity. Curtains sewn from feed sacks, a vegetable garden carved from rocky soil, wildflowers in tin, cans bringing color to their rough-hewn table. For 6 months they worked side by side, clearing land, making plans, visiting the growing settlement of Rivers Bend for supplies. Henry hired 2 local men to help with the heavier work, and by early autumn, the foundation for their sawmill began taking shape. Even as reports of spectacular gold strikes filtered through the settlement, Henry remained focused on their original plan. "Gold is a gamble, Ellie," he would say, "but people will always need lumber." Then came the day that Eleanor would forever divide her life around, before and after. Henry and his workers were clearing a fallen pine near the river's edge when the undermined bank suddenly collapsed. The other men escaped with minor injuries, but Henry, caught directly in the slide, was crushed beneath mud and stone. By the time they recovered his body, Eleanor had become another California widow, one of hundreds created by a land that took as readily as it gave. With trembling hands, she buried her husband on a gentle slope overlooking their unfinished sawmill. Marking his grave with a wooden cross she carved herself. The workers, anxious to seek their fortunes elsewhere, departed with mumbled condolences, leaving Eleanor truly alone for the first time in her life. The practical choice, the expected choice, would have been to sell what little they had established and return east to her sister's home in Illinois. Many women did exactly that, boarding ships and wagons with hollow eyes and shattered dreams. But something in Eleanor, perhaps grief, perhaps stubborn determination, perhaps simply the absence of funds for such a journey, kept her rooted to the land she and Henry had chosen. "I'll give it until spring," she told old Pete Jenkins, a grizzled miner whose claim bordered their northern property line. "Just until the pass is clear." But in her heart, Eleanor recognized the lie. This land, this wilderness that had claimed her husband, had somehow claimed her as well. Its vast indifference offered strange comfort in her grief. Here, where nature's rhythms continued undisturbed by human sorrow, Eleanor found purpose in simple survival. She maintained their garden, chopped wood for the coming winter, and occasionally visited Riversbend for supplies she couldn't produce herself. During one such visit, while trading eggs from her small clutch of hens, she overheard talk that made her blood run cold. Wilson's widow still out there at Pinecrest? A voice she recognized as Victor Dawson's carried across the trading post. A former Mississippi riverboat gambler with calculated eyes and a carefully cultivated charm, Dawson had arrived in the valley just weeks before Henry's death. "Stubborn woman," replied another voice. Frank Mercer, one of two brothers known for their quick tempers and quicker fists, won't take the hint that she ought to clear out. "Shame about that accident," Dawson continued, his voice dropping, "especially since Wilson was about to strike it rich without even knowing." Eleanor froze, her back to the men, pretending to examine a bolt of fabric. "What do you mean?" Frank asked. "That creek running through their property. My pan showed. Color just downstream. Rich color." Wilson was too busy with his fool sawmill to notice he was standing on a fortune. Eleanor's mind raced. Henry had mentioned finding something interesting in the creek bed just days before his death, but had dismissed it, focused on completing the sawmill before winter. Could it be that their land, chosen for lumber rather than mineral prospects, actually contained gold? That night, after returning to her cabin, Eleanor slipped down to the creek with Henry's old mining pan. She had watched enough men work the streams to understand the basic technique. For hours, by the light of a full moon, she squatted in the cold water, filling the pan with gravel and swirling it carefully, letting the water carry away the lighter materials while heavier elements settled to the bottom. Just before dawn, as her fingers grew numb and her back ached in protest, she saw it, a gleaming speck, then another and another. Small but undeniable flakes of gold nestled in the black sand at the bottom of her pan. Henry's something interesting was very interesting indeed. Their property, their struggling homestead, potentially held enough wealth to secure Eleanor's future. But as the eastern sky lightened with approaching day, dread settled in her stomach alongside hope. If she had discovered gold, others eventually would too. And in the lawless frontier, a widow's claim was seen by many as opportunity, rather than property to be respected. The following week confirmed her fears. Victor Dawson, accompanied by the Mercer brothers, Frank and Lyle, paid an unexpected visit to her cabin. Dawson's smile never reached his eyes as he removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Mrs. Wilson, we've come with a proposition that might interest you," he began, voice smooth as polished stone. "This land is too much for a woman alone, too dangerous, too isolated. We're prepared to offer you a fair price, enough to see you comfortably back to civilization." Eleanor stood in her doorway, shotgun visible just inside. "This land isn't for sale, Mr. Dawson. My husband and I chose it together, and I intend to honor his memory by seeing our plans through." Dawson's smile thinned. "Plans change, Mrs. Wilson. Circumstances change. A woman alone can face unexpected difficulties in these parts." The threat lingered in the air between them. Eleanor's hand tightened on the doorframe, but her voice remained steady. "Then it's fortunate I'm well prepared for difficulties, expected or otherwise. Good day, gentlemen." She closed the door firmly and leaned against it, listening to their muttered conversation as they departed. The encounter marked the beginning of a siege that would test Eleanor's resolve to its limits. What followed was a calculated campaign of intimidation. Overnight, stakes appeared marking new claim lines that encroached well onto her property. The creek bed, where she had discovered gold, was suddenly blocked by felled trees, redirecting water away from her land. Shots rang out. In the night, never striking the cabin, but close enough to prevent sleep. When Eleanor rode to River's Bend for supplies, she found merchants suddenly unwilling to trade, their eyes sliding away from hers with muttered excuses about limited stock. Only old Pete Jenkins maintained any semblance of neighborliness occasionally, bringing fresh venison or news from town. "They're playing a waiting game, Ellie," he warned during one such visit. "Dawson's convince most folks you've already left or soon will. Come winter, when you're truly isolated, they'll make their move." Eleanor knew he was right. Already, early snowfall dusted the peaks above Trinity Valley. Within weeks, the higher passes would close, cutting off River's Bend from larger settlements until spring. She would be entirely alone against Dawson and his allies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Maybe you should consider selling," Pete suggested gently. "Not to Dawson, to me, on paper only. I'd hold it until spring, then deed it back when things settle." Eleanor considered the offer, touched by the old miner's kindness. But something in her rebelled at the subterfuge. This land was hers and Henry's, their dream, their future that never came. Surrendering it, even temporarily, felt like a final betrayal of everything they had planned together. "I appreciate the offer, Pete, truly, but I need to stand my ground." She managed to smile. "Besides, they underestimate what a woman from Illinois can endure." Pete shook his head, but respect showed in his weathered face. "You've got sand, Ellie Wilson. I'll give you that." Before leaving, he pressed a small pouch into her hand. "Extra ammunition, keep it close." "Aye." As October gave way to November, Eleanor established a careful routine. Each morning, she checked her property boundaries, noting any new encroachments. She split her time between necessary chores and working a small section of the creek bed, extracting enough gold to fill a tobacco tin, which she kept buried beneath the hearthstones. At night, she slept in short bursts, shotgun across her lap, waking at the slightest sound. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the harsh turn in weather. 3 weeks before Christmas, a storm swept down from the north, burying the valley under 2 feet of snow in a single night. The temperature plummeted, transforming the creek into sheets of ice and making the trail to River's Bend impassable. For 5 days, Eleanor remained snowbound, rationing her supplies and burning precious firewood to keep from freezing. On the 6th morning, after the storm finally abated, she ventured out to check her livestock, 3 chickens and a mule housed in a small lean-to beside the cabin. The pristine snow revealed what her ears had already suspected. While the storm raged, someone had circled her property, coming within yards of the cabin before departing. More troubling still, her water barrel was empty, the wooden staves split from exposure to the cold. Without water, her situation would quickly become desperate. The creek was frozen solid near the cabin, which meant she would need to venture farther downstream to find flowing water. Bundling herself against the cold, Eleanor set out with 2 buckets, following the creek bed. A quarter-mile downstream, where the water ran faster over a series of small falls, she found a section that remained partially open. Kneeling carefully on the icy bank, she reached out with her bucket. The crack of a rifle shattered the winter silence. Splinters of ice flew upward where the bullets struck, inches from her outstretched arm. Eleanor dropped flat against the snow, heart pounding, scanning the tree line for the shooter. "That's far enough, Mrs. Wilson." Victor Dawson's voice carried, clearly in the frigid air. He emerged from the pines, rifle aimed casually in her direction. Behind him, the Mercer brothers spread out, blocking any route back to her cabin. Unfortunate about your water barrel. Bitter cold like this can damage all sorts of things. Eleanor rose slowly, keeping her movements deliberate. She had left her shotgun at the cabin, thinking speed more important than protection for such. A brief errand. A mistake she now bitterly regretted. "What do you want, Dawson?" She kept her voice level, refusing to show fear even as it clawed at her throat. "Just what I offered before. Your land, your claim. Only now I'm afraid the price has dropped considerably." His smile was colder than the air between them. "You see, with the passes closed, no one from Rivers Bend will be visiting until spring. Accidents happen in winter. Tragedy strikes. By the time anyone thinks to check on the widow Wilson, we'll have worked that creek bed clean." The simple, methodical cruelty of his plan struck Eleanor with physical force. They had engineered her isolation, damaged her water supply, and now intended to simply erase her from the equation. In that moment, she realized how completely she had underestimated the depths of gold fever, how it transformed men into monsters, how it rendered human life secondary to yellow dust. "You won't get away with murder," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she recognized their hollowness. Men got away with worse every day in the gold fields. Dawson's laugh confirmed her fears. "Murder? No one's talking about murder, Mrs. Wilson. We're offering you a choice. Leave now. Take your mule. Take what supplies you can carry and start walking. The settlement at Clear Creek is 30 miles south. Difficult journey in this snow, but not impossible for someone determined. Drew," he gestured with his rifle, "or stay and face the consequences of trespassing on our claim." "Trespassing? This is my land." Fury temporarily overcame Eleanor's fear. "Is it?" Frank Mercer spoke up, patting his coat pocket. "Claim registry. Office in Rivers Bend burned down last month. Terrible accident. Fortunately, we have our documentation safe and sound. Do you have yours?" Of course she didn't. The claim papers were with Henry's other documents in the cabin. Even if she could reach them, who would verify them against the destroyed records? "You have until sundown to clear out," Dawson said, lowering his rifle slightly. "Consider it a Christmas mercy." They backed away, disappearing into the tree line, but undoubtedly remaining within rifle range. Eleanor stood motionless by the creek, buckets empty, options emptier still. The temperature was dropping again as afternoon waned. Even if she decided to attempt the journey to Clear Creek, leaving in darkness would be suicide. She would need daylight, supplies, preparation. Moving as naturally as possible, she picked up her buckets and filled them with the icy water. No shots followed. They were confident in their victory, content to let her choose the manner of her defeat. The walk back to her cabin felt endless, each step weighted with desperation. Inside, Eleanor sank onto her single chair, mind racing through possibilities that all led to the same dead end. She could try to hold out in the cabin, but for how long? They would simply starve her out, or worse. She could attempt to reach Clear Creek, but the journey through deep snow would be perilous even for an experienced woodsman, let alone a dressmaker from Illinois. She could hope for unexpected visitors, trappers, travelers, anyone. But with the passes closed, such hope bordered on delusion. As twilight deepened into evening, Eleanor moved methodically around her small domain. She packed what food she could carry, filled her husband's canteen, and gathered her warmest clothing. On impulse, she retrieved the tobacco tin of gold dust from beneath the hearth and tucked it into her innermost pocket. If she were to lose everything else, this at least would not fall into Dawson's hands. The sound that saved her life was so subtle she nearly missed it. A soft scraping against the cabin's back wall. Eleanor froze, then slowly reached for the shotgun. Another scrape, followed by what sounded like hushed voices. Dawson and the Mercers, unwilling to wait until morning, her finger tensed on the trigger as she aimed at the door. The knock, when it came, was on the window, not the door. Eleanor nearly fired from pure startled reflex. Pressed against the glass was a face, not Dawson's, not either Mercer's, but one she had never seen before. A Native American man, features distinct in the fading light, made a cautious gesture for her to open the window. Eleanor hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate hope for any alternative to her current predicament. Finally, keeping the shotgun ready, she unlatched the window and pushed it open a few inches. "White men, watch front path," the man said in accented but clear English. "Come now, quiet." He glanced over his shoulder into the darkness. "Chief Running Eagle sends for widow woman. Come now or never." Chief Running Eagle. Eleanor had heard the name in Rivers Bend, leader of the Wintu tribe whose ancestral lands encompassed much of Trinity Valley. The tribe had largely withdrawn to Eagle Shadow Valley as miners flooded the region, maintaining an uneasy distance from the gold seekers. Why would their chief send for her? It could be a trap, another means to lure her from the dubious safety of her cabin. Yet something in the messenger's direct gaze suggested otherwise, and what choice did she truly have? "Give me 1 minute," she whispered, closing the window. Moving silently, Eleanor gathered her packed supplies, wrapped herself in her heaviest coat, and extinguished her oil lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. After her eyes adjusted, she reopened the window and passed her bundle through to waiting hands before climbing out herself, shotgun last. 2 men, her window messenger and another, gestured for silence, then led her away from the cabin in a direction opposite from where Dawson and his men had last been seen. They moved like ghosts through the snowy forest, following a path invisible to Eleanor's eyes. Several times they paused, listening intently before proceeding. Eleanor followed their example, placing her feet carefully, focusing on silence rather than the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. After what seemed like hours, but was perhaps only one, the trio crested a small rise, and Eleanor saw firelight gleaming ahead. Not the open campfire she expected, but the warm glow of light from several structures, a small village nestled in a protected valley. Her guides led her toward the largest structure, where a central fire cast dancing shadows on hide-covered walls. Outside, an older man waited, his face lined with years, but his posture straight as the pines surrounding them. Without speaking, he gestured for Eleanor to enter. Inside, the warmth was immediate and welcome after the bitter cold of their journey. Several people sat around the fire, their expressions curious but not unwelcoming. The older man, Chief Running Eagle, she presumed, took a seat and motioned for Eleanor to do the same. For a long moment, silence filled the space. Eleanor waited, unsure of protocol or expectation. Finally, the chief spoke, his English deliberate but clear. "The widow from the sawmill place," he said, making it half statement, half question. Eleanor nodded. "Eleanor Wilson, my husband and I—" Her voice caught. "My husband was building a sawmill before he died." Running Eagle nodded slowly. "We have watched. First the husband, then the widow alone, then the bad men coming." His eyes, dark and perceptive, studied her face. "Why does the widow stay when death waits at her door?" The directness of the question startled her. Eleanor considered how to answer, sensing the importance of honesty in this moment. "It was our dream, Henry's and mine, our future." She met the chief's gaze steadily. "And now it's all I have left of him. I couldn't bear to abandon it." One of the younger men, the same who had appeared at her window, leaned forward and spoke rapidly in their native tongue. Running Eagle listened, then turned back to Eleanor. "My son, Swift Arrow, says the bad men plan to take your gold. Is this true?" Eleanor hesitated only briefly. Yes, there is gold in the creek on our land. My husband found it just before he died, but we were building the sawmill instead. These men discovered it somehow, and now they want to force me out. Running Eagle nodded thoughtfully. Gold fever. It makes white men forget their souls. He gestured toward the warmth of the fire. You will stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we will speak more. That night, Eleanor slept better than she had in weeks, wrapped in soft furs in a corner of the lodge. The simple security of other people nearby, people who seemed to hold no ill will toward her, allowed her exhaustion to finally claim her. Morning brought a council of sorts. Running Eagle, Swift Arrow, and several other tribal members gathered with Eleanor around the fire. They spoke their own language at times, but Swift Arrow translated the important points. Our people have watched the gold seekers with troubled hearts, Running Eagle explained. They tear open Mother Earth, poison the waters, kill the fish. The deer flee from their noise. They fight each other like dogs over scraps. His weathered face showed deep concern. But this is not our fight. Eleanor's hopes fell. While grateful for the temporary sanctuary, she had begun to hope for some solution to her impossible situation. However, the chief continued, there is another matter. The white men, these claim jumpers, they cross our hunting grounds uninvited. They frighten game. Twice now, they have threatened our young men who walk ancestral paths. His eyes hardened. This we cannot accept. Swift Arrow leaned forward. The men who threaten you have also shown disrespect to our people. My father believes our causes may be joined. Eleanor listened in growing surprise as Swift Arrow outlined a plan that was as simple as it was daring. The Wintu would not fight or battle directly. They had learned bitter lessons about involving themselves in white men's conflicts. But they could provide a show of presence that might make Dawson reconsider the wisdom of his plans. We cannot stop all gold seekers, Running Eagle concluded, but perhaps we can stop these men from taking what is not theirs. 2 days later, Eleanor returned to her cabin. Accompanied by Swift Arrow and 4 other tribal members, they approached openly, making no attempt at concealment. From the freshly cut wood stacked beside her door and the smoke rising from her chimney, it was clear Dawson and the Mercers had already made themselves at home. Victor Dawson stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, surprise quickly masked by his customary smirk. Mrs. Wilson, we thought you'd chosen the wiser path and departed. His eyes narrowed at her companions. I see you've found some interesting friends. I've come for my property, Mr. Dawson, Eleanor replied steadily. You and the Mercers are trespassing. Dawson laughed. Trespassing? I believe we've established that this claim rightfully belongs to us now. His finger caressed the rifle. Trigger. Your native friends would be wise to return to wherever they came from. This isn't their concern. That is where you are mistaken, Swift Arrow said, stepping forward. The widow woman stands under Wintu protection. The waters you poison flow through our hunting grounds. The noise you make drives away our game. He gestured toward the surrounding forest. Do you think we do not see your disrespect? Do you think we do not watch? As if on cue, movement appeared along the tree line. A dozen more Wintu warriors emerged, silent and watchful, their presence a clear message. The cabin door banged, open as Frank and Lyle Mercer rushed out, drawn by the confrontation. Their hands moved instinctively to their weapons, but faltered at the sight of so many observers. What's going on, Dawson? Frank demanded, his bravado noticeably diminished. Dawson's face had hardened, calculation visible in his eyes as he assessed the situation. Just a misunderstanding about property lines. His smile returned, though it seemed forced. Perhaps we've been hasty. Mrs. Wilson clearly has stronger connections in the area than we realized. This is her land, Swift Arrow stated firmly. Her husband is buried here. You will leave now. For a moment, tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Eleanor held her breath, knowing that Dawson's pride warred with his survival instinct. Finally, practicality won out. We seem to have misjudged the situation, Dawson conceded with false graciousness. We'll gather our things and be on our way. He fixed Eleanor with a final venomous glare. Lucky for you, these savages have taken a shine to you, Mrs. Wilson. Swift Arrow stepped closer, his voice dropping to ensure only Dawson could hear him. We know your face now. We know your smell. If harm comes to the widow woman, we will find you. The mountains are vast. Men disappear in winter. The color drained from Dawson's face. Without another word, he gestured to the Mercer brothers. Within the hour, they had packed their minimal belongings and departed, leaving Eleanor's property for good. As the Wintu prepared to return to their village, Eleanor approached Chief Running Eagle. I don't know how to thank you, she said simply. You saved my life. The old chief studied her thoughtfully. What will you do now, widow woman? The gold in your creek will bring others like these men. Eleanor hadn't considered beyond surviving the immediate threat. I don't know, she admitted. Continue Henry's sawmill, perhaps. There's more honor in that than in gold. Running Eagle nodded approvingly. Wood for homes. This is good work. He gestured towards Swift Arrow. My son will check on you when the moon is full. If trouble returns, send word. That winter proved harsh but transformative. Eleanor completed enough of the sawmill to begin limited operations in the spring. Word spread that the widow Wilson's claim stood under Wintu protection, effectively discouraging further claim-jumping attempts. By summer, she had hired 2 honest workers from Riversbend and established a small but growing lumber business. More remarkably, her connection with the Wintu tribe deepened. Swift Arrow continued his regular visits, initially as a protector, but eventually as a valued friend. Eleanor learned basic phrases in their language, while several tribal members improved their English through conversations with her. She traded lumber and manufactured goods for furs, medicines, and knowledge of local plants that expanded her garden beyond anything possible in Illinois. When spring brought new waves of gold seekers to Trinity Valley, Eleanor made an unprecedented proposal to Chief Running Eagle. The tribe could direct trustworthy miners to portions of her land in exchange for a share of any gold recovered, a share that would help the Wintu purchase necessities in the changing world around them. Meanwhile, the sawmill would operate on another section, providing sustainable income without depleting the land. A partnership, she explained, built on respect rather than theft. To everyone's surprise, the arrangement proved remarkably successful. Within 2 years, a small settlement named Harmony Creek developed around Eleanor's sawmill, noteworthy for its peaceful relations with the Wintu tribe. Eleanor eventually remarried to old Pete Jenkins, of all people, whose gruff exterior had hidden a gentle heart. Together they expanded the sawmill, built a proper trading post, and established a foundation for what would eventually become one of the few towns where Native Americans and settlers conducted business on relatively equal terms. Victor Dawson and the Mercer brothers faded into frontier obscurity, their gold fever eventually leading them to desperate acts in Nevada mining camps. Years later, rumors circulated that Dawson met his end in a dispute over salted claims, justice of a sort finally catching up to him. Chief Running Eagle lived to see his people navigate the treacherous currents of civilization's advance with greater success than many neighboring tribes, due in no small part to the alliance with Eleanor Wilson and the example of Harmony Creek. Before his death in 1863, he told tribal storytellers to remember the widow woman who stood her ground, and how sometimes the most unlikely friendships create the strongest foundations for survival. Eleanor Wilson Jenkins lived until 1889, long enough to see California transformed from wilderness to statehood, long enough to witness the gold rush fade into history. In her final years, she often sat on her porch overlooking Harmony Creek, remembering the terror of those winter days when she nearly lost everything, and the unexpected hand of friendship that changed not just her fate, but the fate of an entire community. Her story remains preserved in Wintu oral tradition and in the town records of what eventually became Harmony Creek Township, a testament to how, even in the darkest moments of human greed, unexpected light can emerge from the shadows. Eleanor sat across from Chief Running Eagle, the warmth of the fire between them casting flickering shadows across the lodge walls. She had answered his question about the gold honestly, but now a deeper sense of uncertainty gripped her. These people owed her nothing, yet they had risked themselves to bring her to safety. The chief's weathered face revealed little of his thoughts as he studied her. "Tell me about this sawmill," Running Eagle said finally, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Why wood instead of gold when so many of your people come here seeking yellow metal?" The question surprised Eleanor. She had expected interrogation about Dawson, about the gold, about her plans, not curiosity about Henry's vision. She found herself explaining how Henry had apprenticed under his father, how he believed in building rather than extracting, how he saw California's future in homes and businesses constructed from the abundant forests. He used to say that gold rushes end, but people will always need lumber, she finished, a familiar ache tightening her throat at the memory of his voice, his certainty. Running Eagle nodded slowly. "Your husband had wisdom many white men lack. The gold seekers take without. Giving back, they come like locusts, strip the land, then move on when nothing remains." He gestured toward the lodge walls. "We have lived in these valleys since the Great Spirit placed us here. We take only what we need. The land provides when treated with respect." Swift Arrow, who had remained silent during much of the exchange, leaned forward. "Father, the men who threatened this woman, they are the same who fired upon Tall Reed and Black Fox when they were hunting last moon." This new information seemed to shift something in the chief's consideration. "Those men crossed into our hunting grounds uninvited?" "Yes," Swift Arrow confirmed. "They said they were searching for new claims. They told our brothers that all land belongs to white men now." Running Eagle's expression darkened. "They speak falsely. These valleys are still Wintu land, regardless of what papers white leaders sign in distant places." He turned his attention back to Eleanor. "These men who threaten you, do they respect anything? Or do they take whatever they desire?" "They take," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "Victor Dawson hasn't worked an honest day since arriving in Trinity Valley. He watches others discover gold, then finds ways to claim it for himself. The Mercer brothers are little more than hired muscle. They've run off at least 2 other miners from their claims since spring." This confirmation seemed to cement something in Running Eagle's thinking. "Rest now. Tomorrow we will speak more of this matter." He gestured to a young woman who approached with blankets and furs. "Night Shadow will show you where to sleep." Eleanor followed the woman to a small alcove within the large lodge, where soft furs had been arranged into a makeshift bed. Exhaustion crashed over her like a physical wave as she lay down, the events of the day finally catching up to her overwrought nerves. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings, sleep claimed her almost instantly. She woke to soft morning light, filtering through smoke holes in the lodge ceiling and the quiet sounds of daily life already in motion around her. Women tended the central fire. Children's voices drifted from outside, and the aroma of something unfamiliar but appetizing filled the air. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Then memory rushed back. The confrontation at the creek, Dawson's ultimatum, the escape through nighttime forest to this Wintu village. Night Shadow appeared with a wooden bowl of something resembling porridge, surprisingly delicious and hearty. Eleanor ate gratefully, watching the activity around her with newfound curiosity. These people, so often dismissed in Rivers Bend conversations as savages or simply the natives, operated with a clear social structure and purpose that impressed her. Their lodge was clean and organized, their interactions respectful but warm. Children watched her with obvious curiosity, but remained polite under the watchful eyes of their elders. Mid-morning brought a gathering around the central fire. Running Eagle sat with several older men who Eleanor assumed were tribal elders. Swift Arrow motioned for her to join them, which she did with some trepidation, uncertain of protocol. She sat where indicated, hands folded in her lap, and waited. "We have spoken of your situation," Running Eagle began without preamble. "These men who threaten you, they are a problem that grows beyond your land. Their disrespect extends to our hunting grounds, our water sources. They do not understand boundaries." An older man beside him spoke in their language, which Swift Arrow translated. "White Bird says we have seen what happens when white men find gold. First come a few, then many. They build towns, bring more weapons, drive away game. The soldiers follow. It is the beginning of the end for all tribes who do not move away." "And yet," Running Eagle continued, "we cannot leave these mountains. Our ancestors are buried here. Our sacred places are here. The rivers and valleys know our songs. To abandon our home is to lose ourselves." Eleanor nodded, understanding this sentiment more deeply than they might expect. Wasn't this exactly why she had refused to leave her cabin despite mounting danger? The connection to place, to memory, to identity. These were powerful forces that transcended cultural differences. "What will you do when you return to your land?" Running Eagle asked. The question startled her. "Return? I didn't think—" She stopped, gathering her thoughts. "Dawson gave me until sundown yesterday to leave. By now they've probably taken possession of my cabin. My claim papers are there, my supplies, everything." Swift Arrow exchanged glances with his father. "They believe you have fled. This gives us advantage." Running Eagle raised his hand, silencing further discussion. "We will not fight your battle for you, widow woman. The Wintu cannot afford to make enemies among the white settlers. Too many of our people have already died in such conflicts." His expression showed the weight of previous losses. "But neither can we allow these disrespectful men to continue, threatening our hunting grounds. Perhaps our interests align in this matter." Over the next hour, an extraordinary conversation unfolded. The Wintu would not engage directly in her property dispute. That was a white man's problem as they saw it. But they could provide a demonstration of presence and solidarity that might make Dawson reconsider his actions. "These men, they fear only two things," Running Eagle observed. "Other white men with more guns or Indians with any guns." A hint of grim humor touched his eyes. "We cannot give you more guns, but we can show them that the widow woman has friends they did not account for." The plan they devised was elegantly simple. Eleanor would return to her cabin openly, accompanied by Swift Arrow and several others. They would make no attempt at stealth, quite the opposite. Their approach would be deliberate, visible, a statement of alliance rather than an ambush. Meanwhile, additional Wintu warriors would position themselves visibly along the tree line, creating an unmistakable message about whose territory Dawson was truly invading. "We will not threaten," Running Eagle emphasized. "We will not attack unless attacked, but they will understand that the woman they thought was alone has guardians they did not expect." By midday, Eleanor found herself walking beside Swift Arrow. Along forest paths she would never have found on her own. 4 other warriors accompanied them, moving with a quiet confidence that amazed her. These men knew every contour of the land, every tree and stone. They paused occasionally, communicating through subtle gestures Eleanor couldn't interpret, ensuring their path remained safe. "How did you know I was in danger?" she asked Swift Arrow during one such pause. "How did you find me last night?" We have watched your cabin since your husband died," he replied matter-of-factly. "At first, to ensure you did not expand your cutting into our sacred groves upstream. Then from curiosity, a woman alone, refusing to leave as others would." He shrugged slightly. "When the bad men began circling like wolves, our hunters reported to my father. He said to watch but not interfere. White problems belong to white people." What changed his mind? Swift Arrow's expression darkened. 2 moons ago, these same men threatened our hunters. Last week, they shot at our fishermen at Trinity Falls. They claim too much territory, show no respect. My father saw that your problem and ours had become the same problem. By mid-afternoon, they approached the clearing where Eleanor's cabin stood. Smoke rose from the chimney. Dawson and the Mercers had indeed made themselves at home. Swift Arrow halted the group at the forest edge, his raised hand signaling for silence. Carefully, they scouted the perimeter, noting positions and movements. 2 horses were tethered behind the cabin, only 2, meaning one of the men was absent. "The big brother is missing," Swift Arrow whispered, referring to Lyle Mercer. "Perhaps hunting or in the creek bed." Eleanor nodded, anxiety tightening her chest as the reality of confrontation loomed. Swift Arrow must have noticed her apprehension. "Remember," he said quietly, "you enter your own home, not theirs. Walk with courage. We are with you." After, ensuring the remaining Wintu warriors were positioned along the tree line, visible enough to be noticed, but distant enough to avoid appearing as an immediate threat, Swift Arrow gave the signal. Together, he and Eleanor walked openly into the clearing, approaching the cabin without hesitation. The other 3 warriors followed several paces behind, presenting a unified but measured presence. They were halfway across the open ground when the cabin door swung open. Victor Dawson emerged onto the small porch, the momentary shock on his face quickly masked by his practiced smugness. He held Henry's rifle, a detail that sent a spike of fury through Eleanor despite her fear. "Mrs. Wilson," he called. False. Cordiality, barely concealing his surprise. "We'd given you up for lost. Thought perhaps you'd taken my advice about Clear Creek." His gaze shifted to Swift Arrow and the others, wariness replacing his smirk. "I see you found yourself some. Unusual company." Eleanor forced herself to walk steadily forward, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice level. "I've come for my property, Mr. Dawson. You and the Mercers are trespassing on my land." The cabin door banged open again as Frank Mercer emerged, hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his belt. "What in hell?" He stopped short at the sight of the Wintu warriors. "Dawson, what's happening here?" Dawson kept his attention on Eleanor, ignoring Frank's question. "Trespassing. I believe we've established that this claim now belongs to us." His finger caressed the rifle's trigger guard. "Your native friends would be wise to return to wherever they came from. This isn't their concern." Swift Arrow stepped forward, his bearing calm but authoritative. "That is where you are mistaken. The widow woman stands under Wintu protection. The waters you poison flow through our hunting grounds. The noise you make drives away our game." He gestured toward the surrounding forest. "Do you think we do not see your disrespect? Do you think we do not watch?" On cue, movement appeared along the tree line. The remaining Wintu warriors emerged from cover, standing silent and watchful. They made no aggressive moves, but their presence was unmistakable. And, unsettling, Frank Mercer's face paled. "Jesus, Dawson, there must be 20 Indians out there." 12, Dawson corrected tersely, though his own confidence had visibly wavered. His eyes narrowed as he recalculated his position. "Where's Lyle?" "Checking traps downriver," Frank answered, his hand still hovering near his pistol. Eleanor, seize the moment of uncertainty. This is my home, Mr. Dawson. My husband is buried on this land. I have nowhere else to go, and I won't be driven off by thieves and bullies. Strong words from a woman who ran away yesterday, Dawson sneered, making a final attempt to regain control of the situation. I did not run. I sought allies. Eleanor climbed the first step of her own porch, a symbolic reclaiming of territory. These people have watched you trespass on their hunting grounds. They've seen you threaten their hunters. Now they've seen you try to steal my property. Another step. How long do you think you'll last in these mountains if both the Wintu and the settlers in Riversbend know what kind of men you really are? The mention of Riversbend struck a nerve. Dawson's reputation there was already questionable. Confirmed theft would make trading or socializing impossible, essentially cutting him off from the nearest white settlement. Swift Arrow moved to stand beside Eleanor. This is her land, he stated firmly. Her husband is buried here. You will leave now. For a long moment, tension crackled like static before a lightning strike. Frank Mercer looked increasingly uneasy, glancing between Dawson and the watching Wintu. Finally, Dawson's survival instinct overcame his pride. It seems we've had a misunderstanding about property lines, he offered with transparent insincerity. We were merely safeguarding Mrs. Wilson's claim in her absence. A noble sentiment, Eleanor replied coldly. Now you can safeguard your own claims elsewhere. Dawson's composure slipped momentarily, revealing the anger beneath. You're making a mistake crossing me, Mrs. Wilson. These savages won't always be around to protect you. Swift Arrow stepped closer to Dawson, his voice dropping to ensure only the gambler could hear his next words. We know your face now. We know your smell. If harm comes to the widow woman, we will find you. The mountains are vast. Men disappear in winter. The blood drained from Dawson's face. Without another word, he handed Henry's rifle to Eleanor. With exaggerated courtesy and gestured to Frank Mercer. Gather our things. Mrs. Wilson is eager to reclaim her. Humble accommodations. Within the hour, Dawson and Frank Mercer had packed their belongings and saddled their horses. Lyle returned shortly afterward, his confusion at the situation quickly overcome by his brother's urgent explanations. The trio departed with undisguised hostility, but no further confrontation, riding toward Riversbend rather than deeper into the wilderness. As they disappeared from sight, Eleanor felt her knees weaken with delayed reaction. She sank onto her porch steps, the enormity of what had transpired washing over her. Her cabin stood undamaged but ransacked, drawers emptied. Onto floors, food supplies pillaged, her carefully organized tools scattered. Yet she was alive. Her claim was secure. The immediate danger had passed. The Wintu warriors gathered at the edge of her clearing, preparing to return to their village. Eleanor approached Chief Running Eagle, who had arrived with the additional warriors but remained in the background during the confrontation. I don't know how to thank you, she said simply. You saved my life and my home. The old chief studied her with thoughtful eyes. What will you do now, widow woman? The gold in your creek will bring others like these men. Eleanor hadn't considered beyond reclaiming her property and surviving the immediate threat. The question forced her to look beyond today's victory, to the uncertain future. I don't know, she admitted. Continue Henry's sawmill, perhaps. There's more honor in that than in gold. Running Eagle nodded approvingly. Wood for homes. This is good work. He gestured towards Swift Arrow. My son will check on you when the moon is full. If trouble returns, send word. As the Wintu prepared to depart, Eleanor impulsively caught Swift Arrow's arm. Wait, please. Will you stay, just for tonight? The prospect of spending her first night back in the cabin alone, wondering if Dawson might return, filled her with renewed anxiety. I would feel safer. Swift Arrow glanced at his father, who considered the request before nodding once. My son and Two Fingers will remain until morning, Running Eagle decided. Then they must return for the autumn hunt preparations. That evening, as Eleanor worked to restore order to her ransacked cabin, she found herself oddly comforted by the presence of the two Wintu men who maintained a watchful vigil from the edge of her clearing. They declined her invitation to sleep inside, preferring to keep watch under the stars, but accepted the food and coffee she brought them. As darkness settled over Trinity Valley, Eleanor sat on her porch, watching the first stars appear. Swift Arrow joined her briefly, his silence companionable rather than awkward. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. "Beyond the problems. With Dawson crossing your hunting grounds, why risk yourselves for one white woman?" Swift Arrow considered her question with the deliberate thoughtfulness she was coming to recognize as characteristic of the Wintu. "My father says that honor knows no color," he replied eventually. "He saw that you fought alone for what was rightfully yours. This, we understand." He gestured toward Henry's grave on the nearby rise. "You remain because your husband's spirit is here. This too we understand." The simple explanation held profound truth. Despite vast differences in language, custom, and belief, certain core values transcended cultural boundaries: respect for the dead, defense of home, resistance against theft and intimidation. In recognizing these shared principles, the Wintu had extended protection that crossed the usually impenetrable divide between settler and native. "Will Dawson return?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. Swift Arrow's expression hardened. "Perhaps. Men like him do not forget wounded pride. But he will think carefully now, knowing you are not alone." He pointed toward the surrounding forest. "We are always watching these valleys. This he now understands." The reassurance brought genuine comfort. Eleanor slept that night with her shotgun nearby, but without the paralyzing fear that had haunted her previous weeks. When morning arrived, Swift Arrow and Two Fingers departed with a simple farewell and a promise to return at the full moon. Eleanor watched them disappear into the forest, marveling at the unexpected alliance that had saved her home. In the days that followed, Eleanor threw herself into restoring order to her property and salvaging what remained of the growing season. She harvested her small garden, repaired damage to her chicken coop, and took stock of her supplies for the approaching winter. The gold in the creek bed remained untouched for now, a secret resource she would consider more carefully before exploiting. A week after the confrontation, old Pete Jenkins appeared at her cabin, his weathered face a mixture of relief and concern. "Her Dawson and the Mercers cleared out," he said without preamble. "Folks in Rivers Bend are saying wild tales about you commanding a war party of Wintu braves." His eyes twinkled with amused skepticism. "Figured I'd come see if you'd transformed into an Indian princess while I wasn't looking." Eleanor laughed for what felt like the first time in months. "Hardly a war party, and certainly not at my command, but the Wintu did help me reclaim my property." She offered no further details, sensing that the exaggerated stories in Rivers Bend actually worked to her advantage. Let the settlement believe. She had mysterious influence with the local tribe. It would discourage other potential claim jumpers. Pete accepted her offered coffee, settling his lanky frame into a chair by her small table. Dawson's spreading his own version, of course. Claims he left because the claim wasn't worth the trouble, not enough color in the creek to bother with. He snorted derisively. Nobody believes him, especially since he and the Mercers are heading out for the Klamath River diggings tomorrow. If your claim was worthless, they'd have stayed to prove it. The news of Dawson's imminent departure lifted an enormous weight from Eleanor's shoulders. While Swift Arrow's assurances had provided some comfort, the physical distance between her and her tormentors would provide far more. "You planning to work that gold yourself now?" Pete asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Could help you set up a proper sluice come spring, if you're interested." Eleanor considered the question. "I don't know yet. Henry wanted the sawmill. The gold was just an unexpected discovery." Pete nodded thoughtfully. "No reason you can't do both, I suppose. Mill for steady income, panning when time allows." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "Could keep an eye on things while you work one or the other. My claim's played out anyway. Been thinking of moving operations." The offer touched Eleanor deeply. Old Pete had been her only consistent ally among the white settlers, bringing occasional supplies and information when others in Riversbend had written her off as doomed to fail or flee. His gruff exterior concealed a fundamental decency increasingly rare in the gold fields. "I'd welcome the help," she admitted, "and the company." As Pete departed that afternoon, promising to return within the week with additional supplies from Riversbend, Eleanor stood on her porch, watching the autumn sunlight gild the pines surrounding her small clearing. For the first time since Henry's death, the future held possibilities rather than mere survival. She thought of Swift Arrow's promised return at the full moon, of old Pete's offered partnership, of Henry's partially constructed sawmill waiting to be completed. She thought of the gold in the creek bed. Not a fortune, perhaps, but enough to secure supplies, hire help, establish something lasting on this frontier. Most remarkably, she thought of the unexpected alliance that had emerged from crisis, the end of friendship extended across a cultural divide that most considered unbridgeable. In the Wintu, she had found not the savages of Riversbend gossip, but people of principle who recognized and respected her determination to hold her ground. As twilight deepened over Trinity Valley, Eleanor Wilson stood on land that was unquestionably hers once more. The mountains that had witnessed her greatest sorrow now witnessed her resilience. The wilderness that had taken her husband had also, paradoxically, provided her with new allies and a new path forward. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them not as a victim of circumstance, but as a woman who had fought for her place in this rugged landscape and won. The first snow of winter dusted Trinity Valley in early December, transforming Eleanor's clearing into a pristine white canvas, unmarred by footprints or wheel tracks. She stood at her cabin window, watching lazy flakes spiral down from a pearl gray sky. The weather had turned suddenly, as it often did in these mountains, catching even experienced frontiersmen by surprise. Old Pete had departed for Riversbend just yesterday to acquire additional supplies, promising to return before any significant snowfall. Eleanor smiled wryly at the white blanket already accumulating on the ground. Nature paid little heed to human promises. 6 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Dawson and the Mercers. True to Pete's word, the claim jumpers had departed for the Klamath River diggings, though Eleanor remained vigilant for their possible return. Each unexpected sound still sent her hand instinctively toward Henry's rifle, a reflex born of weeks, spent in perpetual fear. But gradually, as autumn deepened without incident, she had begun to reclaim not just her property, but her peace of mind. Swift Arrow had kept his promise, appearing precisely at the full moon to ensure her safety. His visits continued with clockwork regularity, usually accompanied by 2 fingers or another Wintu warrior. They never intruded on her privacy, maintaining a respectful distance unless invited closer. But their presence provided both protection and an unexpected connection to the world beyond her isolated clearing. Through these visits, a tentative friendship had developed. Eleanor had begun learning rudimentary phrases in the Wintu language, her clumsy attempts earning rare smiles from her stoic guardians. In return, she shared coffee and whatever baked, goods she had managed with limited supplies, observing with quiet satisfaction their growing appreciation for sourdough bread and molasses cookies. More practically, the Wintu had shared invaluable knowledge about surviving the coming winter, which plants remained edible beneath the snow, how to predict weather changes from subtle shifts in wind and wildlife behavior, how to insulate her cabin more effectively against mountain cold. Little by little, Eleanor was adapting to frontier life in ways that went beyond mere survival, incorporating indigenous wisdom that most settlers dismissed or overlooked entirely. The snow continued falling as Eleanor stoked her fire and assessed her supplies. She had enough firewood stacked to last several weeks, thanks to old Pete's help in cutting and splitting logs from fallen trees. Her food stores were less abundant but adequate. Flour, salt pork, dried beans, the last of her garden vegetables stored in the small root cellar Henry had dug beneath the cabin floor. If Pete made it back from Riversbend before the passes closed, she would be well positioned for even a harsh winter. A movement at the edge of the clearing caught her attention. Eleanor tensed, reaching automatically for the rifle leaning against the wall. But her alarm quickly transformed to relief as she recognized Swift Arrow emerging from the tree line, accompanied by a young Wintu woman. Both carried bundles on their backs and moved with purpose toward her cabin, their moccasined feet leaving the first trails across the snow-covered ground. Eleanor opened her door as they approached, welcoming them out of the increasingly heavy snowfall. "I wasn't expecting visitors in this weather," she said, gesturing them toward the fire. "Is everything all right?" Swift Arrow stomped snow from his feet before entering. Winter comes early this year. The signs are clear. Much snow, long moons of cold. He nodded toward his companion. "This is Morning Lark, daughter of White Bird. She brings winter medicine." The young woman, perhaps 19 or 20, offered a shy smile as she unwrapped her bundle, revealing several deerskin pouches and bundles of dried plants. "For cough," she explained in halting English, holding up a bundle of herbs. "For fever. For wound." Each explanation accompanied by a different pouch. Eleanor accepted the gifts with genuine gratitude, recognizing their value far beyond any monetary assessment. Medical care in the goldfields was primitive at best, non-existent in outlying areas like Trinity Valley. These traditional medicines might well save her life if illness struck during the isolated winter months. "Thank you," she said simply, the words inadequate for the thoughtfulness of the gesture. She turned to Swift Arrow. "Will you stay for coffee? The snow is getting worse." He shook his head regretfully. "We must return before trails disappear. Wintu Winter Camp is 4 hours' walk from here." He hesitated, then added, "Morning Lark will show you how to use the medicines before we go. This knowledge is important." For the next hour, the young woman patiently demonstrated the preparation and application of each remedy, using gestures and simple words to bridge the language gap. Eleanor paid careful attention, making mental notes of proportions and methods, deeply aware that such knowledge was not commonly shared with outsiders. As Morning Lark repacked her remaining supplies, Swift Arrow moved to the window, frowning at the rapidly accumulating snow. "We must go now," he announced, his tone brooking no argument. "Storm grows stronger." Eleanor wanted to protest. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, and even she could see the danger in attempting to travel 4 hours through increasingly heavy snowfall. But she recognized the determination in Swift Arrow's bearing. The Wintu prided themselves on self-reliance and knowledge of the land. Suggesting they couldn't navigate their own territory would be insulting. "Be careful," she said instead, pressing a small package of cookies into Morning Lark's hands. "Thank you for the medicines. They're more precious than gold." The young woman's face brightened at both the gift and the sentiment. "You are friend to Wintu now," she replied solemnly. "Friends help friends survive winter." Those simple words, resonated deeply as Eleanor watched the pair disappear into the swirling white curtain of snow. Friends help friends survive winter. In the harsh reality of frontier life, such alliances transcended the usual boundaries of culture and background. Survival depended not on adhering to societal expectations from distant cities, but on forming bonds with those who understood this unforgiving land. By evening, the gentle snowfall had transformed into a howling blizzard. Wind screamed around the cabin corners, finding every crack and gap in the walls, despite Eleanor's efforts at insulation. She fed the fire steadily, grateful for the substantial woodpile that now seemed less excessive than prescient. Outside, the world had disappeared behind a wall of white, visibility reduced to mere feet beyond her frost-rimed windows. Eleanor thought of Swift Arrow and Morning Lark, hoping they had reached their winter camp before the storm intensified. She thought of Old Pete, likely stranded in River's Bend until the weather cleared. And unexpectedly, she thought of Henry. How he would have secured the cabin against such a storm, how he would have calmed her unspoken fears with practical tasks and quiet confidence. "I'm managing, Henry," she whispered into the empty room, drawing comfort from the imagined conversation. "Not as well as you would, perhaps, but I'm managing." The storm continued for 3 days, a proper Sierra blizzard that transformed the landscape into an alien terrain of towering drifts and buried landmarks. When the skies finally cleared, revealing a blindingly blue expanse above the white world, Eleanor emerged from her cabin to find nearly 4 feet of snow surrounding it. The woodpile was completely buried, requiring hours of careful digging to access. The path to the creek had vanished, necessitating a new route trampled through deep snow for her daily water collection. Old Pete did not return. As days stretched into a week, then 2, Eleanor resigned herself to the reality that the passes to River's Bend were likely closed until spring. Whatever supplies he had gathered remained there, and she would need to manage with what she had stockpiled. December deepened toward Christmas, the first Eleanor would spend entirely alone. To combat the melancholy that threatened during the long, dark evenings, she threw herself into practical improvements to the cabin. Using techniques learned from Morning Lark and her own resourcefulness, she crafted better insulation from pine boughs and moss, sewed thicker curtains from an old blanket to cover the drafty windows, and constructed a snow shovel from a broken barrel stave. The full moon rose, illuminating the snow-covered valley with an ethereal silver light. Eleanor watched from her doorway, half expecting to see Swift Arrow materialize from the tree line as he had each previous month. But the clearing remained empty, the snow unmarked by any tracks but her own. The depth of winter had apparently suspended even the Wintoo's regular patrols. Solitude, once so frightening after Henry's death, had gradually transformed into peaceful solemnity. Eleanor developed rituals to mark the passing days. Morning readings from her single book, a tattered copy of Emerson's essays that Henry had carried from Illinois. Afternoon work on the small carved figures she had begun creating. From pine scraps initially to pass time, but developing into quite detailed animal shapes. Evening journal entries by firelight, recording both practical observations about weather and supplies, and more reflective thoughts about her evolving relationship with this wild place. Christmas Day arrived with another light snowfall. Eleanor marked the occasion by using precious sugar to bake a small cake. Adorning it with preserved berries the Wintoo had shown her how to gather and dry months earlier. She sang carols softly to herself as she worked, voice growing stronger as she realized there was no one to hear her mistakes or judge her simple celebration. That evening, as twilight blurred the boundaries between forest and sky, a sound caught her attention, not the wind or settling timber of the cabin, but something deliberate. Eleanor froze, listening intently as it came again. 3 distinct knocks on her door. Heart racing, she reached for Henry's rifle before approaching cautiously. "Who's there?" she called, voice steadier than her nerves. "Ellie, it's Pete! Open up, girl, before I freeze solid out here." Relief flooded through her as she unbarred the door. Old Pete Jenkins stood on her threshold, snow-covered and exhausted, leading a heavily laden mule through drifts that reached its belly. His beard was frosted with ice, his eyes red-rimmed from snow glare, but his weathered face broke into a wide grin at the sight of her. "Told you I'd be back before any significant snowfall," he declared, stamping snow from his boots as he entered the cabin. "Never said which snowfall, mind you." Eleanor laughed, a release of tension she hadn't fully acknowledged. "You're 2 weeks late and half frozen, but you're the best Christmas gift I could imagine." Pete's journey from Rivers Bend had taken 5 grueling days through snow-choked passes that more sensible travelers had declared impassable. He had refused to accept that Eleanor might spend the winter isolated and potentially undersupplied, stubbornly forging ahead with a mule laden with flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, tools, and even a few luxuries like peppermint sticks and a small mirror. "Town's buzzing with news," he reported as they unloaded his precious cargo. "New strike up near Shasta Way has drawn off half the miners from Rivers Bend. Others are settling in for winter, gambling and fighting and generally making nuisances of themselves." He glanced at her. "No sign of Dawson or the Mercers, in case you were wondering. Word is they found decent color on the Klamath. Enough to keep them occupied through spring at least." The news brought additional relief. With each passing week without incident, Eleanor had grown more confident that the claim jumpers had truly abandoned their designs on her property. But confirmation was nonetheless welcome. As they sat before the fire that evening, sharing a celebratory meal of salt pork, beans, and Eleanor's Christmas cake, Pete cleared his throat awkwardly. "Brought something else from town. Something you might find interesting." He reached into his coat, extracting a folded document. "New mining regulations for Trinity County, established by Miners' Council last month." Eleanor accepted the document curiously. "What does this have to do with me? I'm not actively mining." Pete's eyes twinkled. "Read paragraph 6. She skimmed through legal language about claim sizes and water rights until reaching the specified section. "In recognition of the unique challenges faced by widows and orphans of deceased miners, any claim registered to a miner who perishes, while working said claim, shall be secured to his widow or legitimate offspring for a period of not less than 2 years following his death, regardless of whether active mining operations continue during this period." Eleanor looked up in astonishment. "This protects my claim even if I don't work it?" Pete nodded, clearly pleased by her reaction. "For 2 years at least. Gives you time to decide what you want to do with the place without pressure from claim. Jumpers? It's legitimate too, signed by the county registrar and everything." "How did this happen? Miners aren't generally known for their concern for widows and orphans." Pete's expression grew more serious. "Situation like yours isn't as uncommon as you might think. Men die out here regular. Accidents, illness, violence leaves women and children vulnerable. After what happened with you and Dawson, some of the more decent fellows in Rivers Bend pushed this through the council." He shifted uncomfortably. "Might have mentioned your case specifically as an example of what needed changing." Eleanor was touched beyond words. The Goldfields operated largely on unwritten codes among men. That someone had championed legal protection for women like her represented a rare acknowledgement of their vulnerability and rights. That Pete had apparently advocated on her behalf deepened her already considerable gratitude toward the grizzled miner. "Thank you," she said simply. "This changes everything." Indeed it did. The document represented not just legal protection, but expanded possibilities. With her claim secure, regardless of mining activity, Eleanor could focus on completing Henry's sawmill without fear that lack of gold production would invalidate her rights to the land. She could develop a sustainable business rather than exhausting herself between mining and other essential tasks. "Been thinking about that sawmill of Henry's," Pete commented, seemingly reading her thoughts. "Frame still solid. With the right equipment, we could have it operational by summer." He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "River's Bend's growing, Clear Creek too. Both settlements need lumber, something fierce. Could be a good business, especially with that gold backup when needed." The casual "we" in his statement caught Eleanor's attention. "Are you proposing a partnership, Mr. Jenkins?" Pete's weathered face flushed slightly. "Just thinking practical. You've got the land and the beginnings of a mill. I've got experience with mechanical things, worked in a grist mill back in Missouri before gold fever hit. Between us, we might make something work." He hastened to add, "Just business mind, nothing improper." Eleanor smiled at his discomfort. At 60-plus years, Pete posed no threat to her reputation, such as it existed in this wilderness. Moreover, she had long since stopped concerning herself with the proprieties that might have governed her. Actions back in Illinois. Survival trumped social conventions. "A partnership makes sense," she agreed, enjoying his obvious relief. "We can discuss terms when spring arrives. For now, I'm just grateful you made it through the snow." January brought more storms, interspersed with crystalline days of sunshine that transformed the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling spectacle. Eleanor and Pete settled into a companionable routine, with Pete occupying a lean-to he constructed, adjacent to the cabin, close enough for safety but separate enough for propriety. They spent daylight hours maintaining essential operations, clearing paths, gathering firewood from beneath the snow, breaking ice from the creek, and evenings, planning the sawmill's completion in meticulous detail. Pete proved to be not just a hard-working partner, but engaging company, full of stories from his decades of wandering across the American frontier. He had been a Mississippi riverboat hand, a fur trapper in the Rockies, a scout for wagon trains, crossing the Great Plains, and finally a 49er following golden dreams to California. His experiences provided a window into aspects of frontier life Eleanor had never considered, broadening her understanding of the complex tapestry of individuals who had shaped the West. In return, she shared her own much more limited experiences. Her childhood in Springfield, her marriage to Henry, the dreams that had brought them to California. Pete listened with surprising attentiveness, treating her modest history with the same respect he gave to his own more adventurous tales. February arrived with a brief thaw that reduced snowdrifts and raised hopes for an early spring. During this warmer interlude, Swift Arrow made his first appearance since December, emerging from the forest with 2 fingers and an older Wintu man Eleanor didn't recognize. Pete watched their approach warily. His experiences with native tribes had been mixed over the years, and he remained skeptical of Eleanor's assurances regarding the Wintu's friendly intentions. He positioned himself protectively on the porch as Eleanor went to greet the visitors. "You survived the great snow," Swift Arrow observed with evident approval. "We wondered when no smoke rose from your chimney during the worst storms." "The snow covered the chimney completely," Eleanor explained. "We had to dig it out every few hours to prevent smoke backing up into the cabin." Swift Arrow nodded, then gestured to his elderly companion. "This is Greyhawk, our tribe's medicine man. He wished to meet the woman who stands her ground." The old man studied Eleanor with penetrating eyes that missed nothing, her sturdy build from months of physical labor, the confidence in her posture that had replaced earlier uncertainty, the respectful but direct way she met his gaze. After a long moment, he spoke in Wintu, which Swift Arrow translated. "Greyhawk says, you have put down roots like the oak tree. not easily moved once established. This is good. People who belong to the land treat it differently than those who merely take from it. Eleanor was unexpectedly moved by the assessment. Please tell him I'm learning to listen to this place, not just survive in it. When this was translated, Greyhawk nodded approvingly and reached into a pouch at his waist. He extracted a small object wrapped in soft deer skin, offering it to Eleanor with formal dignity. Unwrapping it carefully, she found a beautifully carved pendant of green stone, polished to a soft luster and suspended on a leather cord. "Serpentine stone," Swift Arrow explained, "from our sacred quarry. Greyhawk says it will help you hear the land more clearly if you wear it when making important decisions." The gift represented far more than a simple trinket. Access to the Wintu's sacred stone quarry was strictly limited even among their own people. That Greyhawk would share such a spiritually significant item with an outsider indicated a level of acceptance Eleanor had not dared hope for. "I'm honored," she said, immediately placing the cord around her neck. "Please tell him I will treasure this and respect its meaning." As Swift Arrow translated, Pete finally approached from the porch, his natural wariness overcome by curiosity. Eleanor performed introductions, relieved when Pete removed his hat in a gesture of respect toward Greyhawk. "Any friends of Ellie's are welcome here," the old miner declared gruffly. "She speaks highly of how you helped her when that snake Dawson tried taking her claim." Swift Arrow's normally impassive expression showed surprise at Pete's directness, but he nodded acknowledgement. "The widow woman has courage. Our people respect courage." What followed was an extraordinary conversation, halting at first but gradually warming as mutual suspicion gave way to genuine exchange. Pete shared news from Rivers Bend that affected Wintu interests, rumors of new mining operations moving upstream toward their hunting grounds, gossip about cavalry units potentially being stationed in Trinity County come spring. In return, Swift Arrow offered valuable information about game movements and weather patterns that would influence the success of Eleanor's sawmill operations. By the time the Wintu departed several hours later, a tentative understanding had been established between Pete and Eleanor's native allies. It was not friendship exactly. Too many historical grievances and cultural differences stood between them for that, but a pragmatic recognition of mutual interests in maintaining their respective footholds in Trinity Valley. "Reckon I misjudged your situation some," Pete admitted that evening as they discussed the visit. "Always figured Indians either attacked white settlements or avoided them entirely. Never considered this middle path you found." Eleanor fingered the serpentine pendant thoughtfully. "I think we're all finding middle paths out here. The rules from back east don't work in this wilderness. We're creating something new, whether we intend to or not." The remainder of February passed uneventfully, marking time with small domestic triumphs: Eleanor's first successful sourdough bread, Pete's repair of the sagging porch steps, their joint efforts to clear land around the half-built sawmill in preparation for spring construction. March arrived with warming trends that accelerated snowmelt, transforming the placid creek into a rushing torrent that threatened to overflow its banks. "Spring floods coming early," Pete observed with concern. "Need to move anything valuable to higher ground. Creek like this can rise 10 feet overnight when the mountain snow really starts melting." Together, they relocated tools and supplies to the sawmill site, which stood on slightly elevated ground. Eleanor was transferring the last of her precious flour when a sound from the direction of Rivers Bend caught her attention, the distant but unmistakable jingling of harness bells. "Someone's coming," she called to Pete, who immediately abandoned his work to join her, rifle in hand. After Dawson's threats, neither of them took unexpected visitors lightly. They watched tensely as a wagon appeared on the crude track that served as a road, pulled by a team of 4 mules and driven by a heavy-set man Eleanor didn't recognize. Beside him sat a slender woman in a practical traveling dress, her face shadowed by a wide-brimmed bonnet. "That's Samuel Howard from Rivers Bend," Pete identified the driver, relaxing slightly. "Runs the general store." Don't know the woman, though. The wagon halted at the edge of the clearing, and Howard raised his hand in greeting. "Mrs. Wilson, got someone here mighty anxious to see you." The woman beside him pushed back her bonnet, revealing a face so familiar that Eleanor gasped. Aloud, "Rebecca! How on earth?" Rebecca Wilson, Henry's younger sister, practically tumbled from the wagon in her haste, rushing across the muddy ground to embrace Eleanor with tearful joy. "Ellie, thank God you're alive. We thought, when your letters stopped coming, we feared the worst." Eleanor returned the embrace, momentarily speechless with shock. Rebecca had been newly married when Eleanor and Henry departed for California. She had remained in Springfield with her husband, James. Maintaining the family carpentry business Henry had abandoned. Their correspondence had dwindled after Henry's death, partly due to Eleanor's grief and partly due to the unreliable postal service to remote mining regions. "I'm fine," Eleanor assured her, finding her voice at last. "More than fine, actually, but what are you doing here? How did you even find me?" Rebecca wiped tears from her cheeks, composing herself with visible effort. "James passed last autumn. Pneumonia took him so quickly. I sold the business and decided to come find you. Your last letter mentioned Trinity River and Rivers Bend, so I started there." She glanced toward Samuel Howard, who was conversing with Pete near the wagon. "Mr. Howard knew roughly where your claim was located. He was kind enough to bring me the final distance." Eleanor introduced Pete and explained their partnership arrangement. Rebecca appeared momentarily startled by the unconventional situation, but recovered quickly, her natural practicality asserting itself. "I'm grateful you haven't been completely alone out here," she said, squeezing Eleanor's hand. "And I've come to stay if you'll have me. There's nothing left for me in Springfield now." The unexpected arrival of family, the sister-in-law who had been more like a true sister, transformed Eleanor's outlook entirely. Rebecca's presence meant not just additional hands for the work ahead, but a connection to Henry, to shared memories, to the life that had existed before the wilderness had claimed and transformed her. "Of course you'll stay," Eleanor declared, leading Rebecca toward the cabin. "There's more than enough room, especially now that we'll be expanding." She gestured toward the sawmill foundation. "Pete and I are completing Henry's sawmill this spring. Trinity Valley needs lumber, and we intend to provide it." Rebecca took in the primitive cabin, the half-built sawmill, the surrounding wilderness with surprisingly appreciative eyes. Henry always said California represented opportunity for those willing to work for it. I see he was right, though perhaps not in the way he imagined. That evening, as the 3 of them shared a meal in the cozy cabin, conversation flowed easily between past and future, between memories of Illinois and plans for California. Rebecca revealed hidden depths of resilience and adaptability that Eleanor hadn't previously recognized in her more sheltered sister-in-law. Widowhood had apparently hardened her as well, transforming the somewhat frivolous young woman Henry had known into someone determined to forge her own path. "I've brought something that might interest you," Rebecca mentioned as they cleared away supper dishes. She retrieved a leather portfolio from her trunk, extracting several documents with evident pride. "James and I maintained correspondence with Henry's former apprentices. When I decided to come west, Thomas Crawford, you remember him, provided these. The documents proved to be detailed technical drawings for sawmill mechanisms, far more sophisticated than the rudimentary plans Henry had been working from. Crawford, now established as a successful millwright in Chicago, had included specific instructions for adapting the designs to frontier conditions with limited materials." Pete whistled softly as he examined the drawings. With these plans, we could build something twice as efficient as what we were considering, might need to order some specialized equipment from Sacramento, but most of it we could fabricate here with the right tools. I brought tools as well, Rebecca said with quiet satisfaction. James's entire workshop, in fact. They're in storage at Mr. Howard's establishment in Riversbend, awaiting transport here once the roads dry out. Eleanor exchanged amazed glances. With Pete, what had seemed like a modest, subsistence-level operation suddenly expanded into something with genuine commercial potential. With proper equipment, skilled designs, and now 3 partners instead of 2, the Wilson sawmill could become a significant enterprise in the developing region. As darkness settled over Trinity Valley, Eleanor stood on her porch, watching stars emerge above the shadowed mountains. Behind her, lamplight spilled from cabin windows, illuminating Rebecca and Pete still discussing technical specifications with animated interest. Before her stretched the wilderness that had nearly destroyed her, but ultimately shaped her into someone stronger, more resourceful, more connected to the fundamental rhythms of life and survival. She touched the serpentine pendant at her throat, reflecting on Greyhawk's words about putting down roots, about belonging to the land rather than merely taking from it. Perhaps that was the true difference between those who came to exploit California's gold and those who would remain to build its future. The willingness to develop reciprocal relationships with both the land and its original inhabitants. Eleanor Wilson had arrived in Trinity Valley as a dressmaker's wife, with delicate hands and limited horizons. Widowed by the gold rush, threatened by claim jumpers, saved by unexpected alliances, she now stood poised to help shape a community where different cultures might coexist, where resources could be utilized sustainably, where women like herself and Rebecca could forge independent paths. Spring's first tentative wildflowers were already appearing in sunny patches where snow had retreated. Soon the mountains would burst into vibrant life, mirroring the renewed purpose Eleanor felt coursing through her veins. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and frontier life guaranteed there would be many, she would face them not as a victim of circumstance, but as a woman who had claimed her place in this rugged landscape through determination, adaptability, and the courage to build bridges between worlds typically divided by suspicion and conflict. Trinity Valley had taken her husband, but given her something equally precious, a future entirely her own, shaped by her choices rather than society's expectations. As she turned back toward the warm light of her cabin, Eleanor whispered a quiet thank you to the wilderness that had both tested and transformed her. Somewhere in the forest beyond, she imagined Swift Arrow and his people acknowledged her gratitude with their characteristic silent understanding. Different paths had converged in this remote valley, creating something none of them could have anticipated, a foundation for coexistence that might, with continued goodwill and effort, outlast the gold fever that had brought them all together. The spring thaw transformed Trinity Valley into a riot of color and sound. Snowmelt rushed down from higher elevations, turning the once placid creek beside Eleanor's property into a roaring torrent. Wildflowers erupted across meadows in vibrant explosions of purple, yellow, and white. Birds returned in chattering flocks, their morning songs creating a symphony that Eleanor had nearly forgotten during the long, silent winter. April sunshine warmed the clearing as Eleanor, Pete, and Rebecca worked steadily on the sawmill construction. The winter had passed more comfortably than any of them had expected. Rebecca's arrival had brought not just welcome companionship, but practical skills Eleanor hadn't anticipated. The younger woman proved remarkably adept at mechanical tasks, her nimble fingers and precise measurements contributing significantly to their planning sessions around the cabin table during snowbound evenings. Now, with the ground finally firm enough to support heavy work, the 3 partners had begun transforming plans into reality. The foundation Henry had laid the previous year remained solid, requiring only minor repairs where frost had heaved. Some stones. Upon this base, they were erecting a structure far more sophisticated than Henry had originally envisioned, thanks to the detailed drawings Rebecca had brought from Thomas Crawford. "Pass me that level, would you?" Pete called from atop a ceiling beam, where he balanced with the surprising agility of a man half his age. Rebecca handed up the tool, her once pale skin now tanned from weeks of outdoor work. The transformation in Henry's sister went beyond mere physical appearance. Frontier life had awakened something in her that had perhaps always existed beneath Springfield propriety, a natural resourcefulness and determination that mirrored Eleanor's own journey. Eleanor paused in her work of sorting milled lumber, surveying their progress with satisfaction. The sawmill's framework now stood nearly complete, a testament to countless hours of labor and stubborn perseverance through setbacks and challenges. Within another month, if their calculations proved correct, they would have the water wheel installed and the main saw mechanism operational. By summer's height, Wilson's sawmill would begin producing lumber for the growing settlements of Trinity County. "Riders coming," Rebecca announced, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Eleanor turned toward the River's Bend Trail, tensing slightly. Though months had passed without incident, the memory of Dawson and his threats remained a shadow. At the edges of her mind, 3 horsemen appeared around the bend, leading a heavily laden pack mule. As they drew closer, Eleanor recognized Samuel Howard's substantial frame at the head of the party. The storekeeper from Riversbend had become a regular visitor since, bringing Rebecca to the property, his commercial instincts recognizing the potential profit in establishing early relations with what promised to become a significant local enterprise. "Morning, ladies. Jenkins," Howard called jovially as they approached, "brought those saw blades you ordered, arrived on yesterday's supply wagon from Sacramento." He gestured to his companions, "Also brought some potential customers eager to meet the proprietors of Trinity Valley's first sawmill." The men accompanying Howard were a study in contrasts. One, introduced as Michael Harrington, wore the tailored attire of an Eastern businessman transplanted west. Clean-shaven, articulate, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commerce rather than manual labor. The other, Thomas Blackwell, presented the weathered appearance of a long-time frontiersman, bearded, sun-leathered, with the watchful eyes of someone who had survived by wit and skill in unforgiving territories. "Mr. Harrington represents the Rivers Bend Development Association," Howard explained as they all gathered in the shade of a large pine. "They're planning a significant expansion, new municipal buildings, proper housing, commercial structures. They'll need considerable lumber." Eleanor noted the calculating assessment in Harrington's gaze as he surveyed their operation. "Impressive progress," he commented, "though I confess surprise at finding such an enterprise under female management." His tone suggested he found the arrangement curious rather than concerning. "Mrs. Wilson owns the land," Pete interjected, before Eleanor could respond. "Original claim was her husband's. My technical experience and Mrs. Rebecca's financing created a natural partnership. Gender doesn't much matter when the lumber's cut straight." Harrington smiled, acknowledging the rebuke with unexpected grace. "No offense intended. Enterprise is the lifeblood of the frontier, regardless of who provides it. The Development Association is primarily concerned with reliability and quality, which you'll get from Wilson's sawmill," Rebecca assured him with the poise Eleanor had come to admire. "We are implementing cutting techniques from the most advanced Eastern operations, adapted for local timber characteristics." While this conversation continued, shifting into specific requirements, potential volume, and delivery schedules, Eleanor found herself drawn to the quieter member of the party. Thomas Blackwell had removed himself slightly from the business discussion, his attention focused on the surrounding forest with the appreciation of someone who read wilderness like others read books. "You're not part of the Development Association?" Eleanor asked, joining him where he stood, examining the growth pattern of a particularly massive pine. Blackwell shook his head. "Just riding with Howard for safety. Trails still have occasional troublemakers this time of year." His voice carried the softened edges of a southern accent. "I trap and guide mostly, but I'm also interested in your operation for different reasons." "Oh," Eleanor prompted when he didn't elaborate. "Been watching how you've established yourself." "Here," he continued, his directness refreshing after Harrington's polished diplomacy. "Not just the sawmill, your relationship with the Wintu." Eleanor tensed slightly. Relations between settlers and native tribes remained a delicate subject throughout the gold regions, with violence and misunderstanding more common than cooperation. "The Wintu have been fair neighbors," she replied carefully. "We respect their boundaries. They respect ours." Blackwell nodded thoughtfully. "More than that, from what I hear, word travels in these mountains. Stories about a widow who trades fairly with the tribe, who learns their medicines, who doesn't bring trouble to their doorstep." His weathered face revealed nothing of his own opinion on these matters. "Unusual arrangement. Necessity creates unusual arrangements," Eleanor responded. "I might not have survived my first winter without their knowledge." "That's precisely my interest," Blackwell said, lowering his voice. "I'm scouting for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, unofficially, governments looking for models of cooperation rather than conflict. Too much blood spilled already between whites and natives across California." The revelation surprised Eleanor. The Bureau of Indian Affairs had a decidedly mixed reputation in frontier territories, sometimes genuinely seeking peaceful solutions, other times serving as a mere prelude to forced relocations and broken treaties. "What exactly are you scouting for?" "Ways forward," Blackwell answered simply. "The gold rush changes everything for tribes like the Wintu. Their world won't remain untouched, regardless of anyone's wishes. Question is, whether change comes through bullets or something more civilized." He gestured toward the sawmill. "Operations like yours, providing economic partnerships rather than simply taking land, might offer alternatives worth examining." Before Eleanor could pursue this intriguing conversation further, Howard called for Blackwell's attention. The group's horses were being resaddled, business apparently concluded for the morning. Harrington approached with an extended hand and a satisfied expression. "Your partners and I have reached a tentative agreement," he informed Eleanor. "The association would like to place an advance order for lumber, payment upon delivery, but with a written commitment that should help secure any additional financing you might need for equipment." He offered a folded document. "Terms are outlined here. We can formalize when you're next in Rivers Bend." After the visitors departed, Eleanor shared Blackwell's comments with Pete and Rebecca as they unpacked the newly arrived saw blades. Pete received the information with characteristic skepticism. "Bureau of Indian Affairs rarely brings good news for anybody," he observed grimly. "Might be sincere about finding peaceful solutions, but government policies change with whatever way the wind blows in Washington." Rebecca, who had encountered the complex realities of frontier relations only recently, appeared more optimistic. "But surely cooperation benefits everyone. The Wintu have helped us. We can help them navigate these changes." Eleanor found herself somewhere between these perspectives. Her experiences with Swift Arrow and his people had taught her to look beyond simplistic views of native tribes as either noble savages or dangerous obstacles to progress. They were people adapting to catastrophic changes in their world, making strategic decisions for survival just as she had done after Henry's death. "I think we should discuss this with Chief Running Eagle," she decided finally. "If government Agents are taking interest in Trinity Valley. The Wintu should know, whatever Blackwell's intentions. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Swift Arrow appeared at the clearing's edge with Morning Lark and 2 other young Wintu. They brought early-season berries and river fish to trade, continuing the pattern of exchange that had developed organically over the preceding months. While Pete and Rebecca handled the actual trading, Eleanor drew Swift Arrow aside to relay Blackwell's visit. The young warrior received the information with characteristic reserve, asking precise questions about what had been said and observed. "This man watches with government eyes," he summarized thoughtfully. "Not military, not settler. Interesting." "Should your father be concerned?" Eleanor asked directly. Swift Arrow considered the question. "My father already knows change comes, like floodwater, unstoppable, reshaping everything. We cannot prevent what approaches, only guide how it flows through our lives." He glanced toward the sawmill construction. "Your business grows. More white settlers will follow where lumber exists to build shelters." "I won't forget who helped me survive when no one else would," Eleanor assured him, understanding the unspoken concern beneath his observation. A rare smile briefly softened Swift Arrow's solemn features. "This we know. Why else would Morning Lark bring marriage medicine?" He nodded toward where the young woman was showing Rebecca how to prepare the freshly caught fish. "Marriage medicine," Eleanor repeated, confused. "For joining 2 lives together," Swift Arrow explained, with subtle amusement. "She sees how Old Mountain Man looks at you when he thinks no one watches." Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks as she processed his meaning. "Pete?" The idea seemed absurd at first reflection. Their relationship had been strictly business and practical friendship. Yet as Swift Arrow's words sank deeper, Eleanor found herself reconsidering countless small gestures and unspoken considerations that had characterized their interactions through the winter months. "I think Morning Lark misunderstands," she protested. Weakly, Swift Arrow shrugged, unconvinced. "Wintu women see clearly in matters of the heart, but the medicine is yours to use or not as you choose." He shifted topics abruptly, returning to the more comfortable territory of business arrangements. "My father wishes to speak with you about trees. Our council has concerns about which forests your sawmill will cut." Eleanor welcomed the change of subject, though her thoughts continued to circle back to Morning Lark's unexpected medicine and its implications. She and Swift Arrow arranged a meeting with Chief Running Eagle for the following week, when the sawmill's framework would be complete enough to leave under Rebecca's supervision. After the Wintu departed, Eleanor found herself watching Pete with new awareness as he worked, noting the careful consideration he showed for her opinions, the small ways he anticipated her needs, the quiet pride in his eyes when she mastered a skill he had taught her. Had something more than partnership developed during their shared winter isolation? More unsettling still, how did she feel about that possibility? At 58, Pete Jenkins was nearly 20 years her senior, with weathered features that bore witness to decades of frontier hardship. Yet beneath his gruff exterior lay a fundamental decency increasingly rare in gold country. He had risked his life to bring supplies through winter storms, had respected her authority despite society's expectations, had never once treated her as anything less than an equal partner in their enterprise. Eleanor pushed these thoughts aside as they completed the day's work. The sawmill demanded her full attention, and personal considerations could wait until more pressing matters were resolved. Yet that evening, as they shared a meal in the cabin that now felt comfortably crowded with 3 inhabitants, she found herself noticing the easy domesticity that had developed among them, a stark contrast to the desperate solitude that had followed Henry's death. The following week brought perfect weather for their journey to the Wintu settlement. Eleanor and Pete set out at dawn, following a path that had become increasingly familiar through seasonal visits. Swift Arrow met them halfway, guiding them, through forest sections where game trails replaced discernible paths. By midday, they reached Eagle Shadow Valley, where the Wintu's permanent structures stood interspersed with seasonal dwellings recently reconstructed after winter. The settlement had grown since Eleanor's first visit during the Dawson confrontation. Several new lodges suggested increased consolidation of Wintu families previously scattered across multiple locations. A strategic response, Swift Arrow explained, to encroaching mining operations and resulting game scarcity. Chief Running Eagle received them in the council lodge, where several tribal elders had gathered. The atmosphere was formal but not unfriendly, with Eleanor and Pete offered places of honor near the central fire. After ceremonial exchanges and shared food, protocols, Eleanor had learned to respect. The discussion turned to the purpose of their meeting. "Your sawmill grows quickly," Running Eagle observed. "Soon many trees will fall to feed hungry saws. The Wintu Council wishes to understand which forests you plan to harvest." Eleanor had anticipated this concern. Together with Pete, she unrolled a crude map of Trinity Valley they had prepared, using charcoal to indicate their property boundaries and proposed cutting areas. "We intend to begin here," she explained, indicating the slopes immediately surrounding their claim. "These forests were already partially cleared for mining operations. We'll take damaged stands first, then implement selective cutting rather than clear felling." Pete elaborated on their long-term plans. "Proper forestry practices mean taking mature trees and leaving younger ones to grow. Eastern states learned hard lessons about stripping hillsides bare, creates flooding, erosion, ruins the land for generations. We aim to harvest sustainably, leaving enough forest to regenerate." The concept of selective harvesting rather than wholesale clearing clearly interested the elders, who conferred briefly in their language. Running Eagle translated the central question that emerged. How will you ensure other white men follow these practices? Once trails open forests, many come with axes and no respect. It was a legitimate concern that had troubled Eleanor as, well, their operation might implement responsible methods, but success would inevitably attract competitors with less scrupulous approaches. "We cannot control all who follow," she acknowledged honestly, "but we can establish standards and expectations for Trinity Valley timber, and we propose something more concrete as well." She indicated specific sections of the map, areas farther up the watershed. "These forests contain your sacred groves and hunting territories, according to Swift Arrow. We propose a formal agreement. Wilson Sawmill will never harvest these areas, and we will mark boundary lines that other operators must respect." One elder spoke rapidly, his tone skeptical. Running Eagle translated, "White man's agreements mean little when gold or timber beckon. What force stands behind your boundaries?" Pete leaned forward, his expression earnest. "The law, for one. Mrs. Wilson's claim gives her certain rights to control access through her property to these upper forests. More practically will be the established operation in Trinity Valley. Newcomers generally find cooperation more profitable than conflict." Eleanor added the most compelling argument. "Beyond that, we propose a business partnership. The Wintu would receive a percentage of sawmill profits in exchange for helping maintain these protected forests and assisting with identifying suitable harvest areas in non-sacred territories. Your knowledge of these woods exceeds anything settlers could develop in a generation." This proposal, radical by frontier standards, created intense discussion among the elders. Several voiced immediate objections, while others appeared intrigued by its possibilities. Running Eagle listened to all perspectives before responding. "Such partnership has no precedent," he noted carefully. "Many among us fear any agreement that seems to sell forest rights we already possess. Others recognize that without allies, we may lose everything as more gold seekers arrive." He studied Eleanor with penetrating intensity. Why offer this? Most white operations simply take what they desire. Eleanor chose her words carefully, aware that cultural differences might easily lead to misunderstanding. The Wintu helped me when I stood to lose everything. I haven't forgotten that debt. But beyond personal gratitude, I believe our futures in this valley are connected. The gold will eventually diminish, but communities, both yours and those of the settlers, will remain. Building cooperation now may prevent bloodshed later. Running Eagle nodded slowly. Wisdom sees beyond the nearest mountain. We will consider your proposal and provide answer when next moon becomes full. He signaled that the formal council had concluded, though hospitality dictated that guests would remain for the communal evening meal. As preparations for this meal commenced, Morning Lark approached Eleanor with evident purpose. In halting English, supplemented by gestures, she inquired whether Eleanor had used the special herbs provided during their winter visit. When Eleanor admitted she had not, uncertain of their exact purpose, Morning Lark's expression registered clear disappointment. For heart healing, she explained, tapping her chest. For new beginnings after grief ends. Important medicine for widow woman ready for second planting season. The metaphor was unmistakable despite the language barrier. Eleanor found herself simultaneously touched by the young woman's concern and embarrassed by her directness. My grief has lessened, she acknowledged carefully. But second planting seasons require careful consideration. Morning Lark smiled knowingly. Old mountain man waits patiently, good quality in husband. With that pronouncement, she returned to her food preparation duties, leaving Eleanor to contemplate yet another voice, encouraging her to recognize what apparently everyone else already saw. The evening meal proved surprisingly festive, with several Wintu sharing songs and stories that Swift Arrow translated for the visitors. Pete, initially reserved in the unfamiliar setting, gradually relaxed as genuine hospitality overcame cultural differences. Eleanor watched with quiet pleasure as he engaged with tribal members, his natural curiosity overcoming decades of frontier-bred suspicion. They departed the following morning with promises to return at the full moon for the council's decision. The journey back to their clearing passed largely in thoughtful silence, both processing the complex negotiations and potential partnership that lay ahead. Only as they came within sight of the sawmill did Pete finally address what Eleanor suspected had been on his mind throughout their return trip. "Interesting proposals you made back there," he observed casually. "Partnership with the Wintu goes well beyond anything I expected. Might raise eyebrows in Rivers Bend." Eleanor maintained a deliberately steady pace, eyes on the path. "Raised eyebrows don't concern me. Practical solutions for mutual benefit do." "No argument here," Pete assured her quickly. "Just noting it's the kind of forward thinking that makes our operation different." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "One of many things I've come to admire about you, Ellie." The simple statement, delivered without dramatic context or pressure for response, touched Eleanor deeply. Pete wasn't a man given to flowery declarations or unnecessary sentiments. His straightforward acknowledgement of admiration represented significant emotional territory for a lifetime frontiersman accustomed to independence. Before Eleanor could formulate a response that neither dismissed nor overinterpreted his comment, Rebecca appeared from the sawmill waving excitedly. "You're back just in time. The water wheel assembly arrived from Sacramento while you were gone. Mr. Howard delivered it himself." The moment for personal conversation dissolved as practical matters reclaimed their attention. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of intense labor as they installed the complex mechanism that would convert creek water power into the driving force for their main saw. Technical challenges arose daily, requiring improvised solutions with available materials. Rebecca proved invaluable during this phase, her precise measurements and careful reading of Crawford's diagrams preventing potentially costly errors. By the time the full moon approached, bringing with it the Wintu Council's decision on their proposed partnership, the Wilson sawmill stood nearly operational, lacking only final adjustments to the saw blade tension and drive mechanisms. Eleanor surveyed their creation with mingled pride and astonishment. What had begun as Henry's modest dream had evolved into something far more substantial, a permanent enterprise that could sustain not just the three partners, but eventually provide employment for others in Trinity Valley. On the evening before their scheduled return to the Wintu settlement, Eleanor found herself restless, stepping outside the cabin to enjoy the early summer twilight. The lengthening days had brought lush growth to the clearing, with wildflowers and native grasses reclaiming areas disturbed during winter construction. She followed a path toward Henry's grave on the small rise overlooking their property, a journey she made less frequently now as acute grief had gradually transformed into something more bittersweet. The simple wooden cross remained sturdy, protected from weather by the small shelter Pete had thoughtfully constructed over it during winter. Eleanor settled beside it, brushing away pine needles that had accumulated on the grave mound. In the months following Henry's death, she had spoken aloud to him during these visits, finding comfort in maintaining one-sided conversations with her lost husband. Tonight, however, she found herself silent, uncertain what she would say if words came. Soft footsteps announced Pete's approach. He paused at a respectful distance, hat in hand. "Didn't mean to interrupt your visit," he apologized quietly. "Just wanted to let you know I've finished adjusting that main drive shaft. We should be ready for a test run tomorrow after returning from the Wintu Council." Eleanor nodded acknowledgement, but made no move to leave. After a moment's hesitation, Pete approached closer, his weathered face solemn in the fading light. "He'd be proud of what you've accomplished, Ellie," he said simply, gesturing toward the sawmill visible below. "Turned tragedy into something that will benefit the whole valley." "We accomplished it," Eleanor corrected gently. "I couldn't have done this alone." Pete nodded, accepting the amendment. He seemed about to depart, then visibly gathered his resolve. "Been meaning to speak with you about something. Seems appropriate to say it here, with Henry as witness, so to speak." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Our partnership agreement runs through next spring. Been thinking maybe we should discuss extending it permanently." The careful phrasing contained unmistakable subtext. Eleanor studied Pete's face, the earnest expression, the vulnerability rarely visible beneath his practical exterior, the quiet hope in eyes that had witnessed countless frontier disappointments. In that moment, she recognized what Morning Lark had apparently seen months earlier. Pete Jenkins had fallen in love with her, gradually and without expectation, through shared hardship and common purpose. More surprising was her own reaction to this realization. Not discomfort or awkward pity, but a warm certainty that felt like recognition rather than revelation. What had begun as a practical arrangement had evolved almost imperceptibly into something resembling family. Not the passionate romance of her youth with Henry, but something equally valuable. A partnership founded on mutual respect, shared goals, and genuine affection. "I think Henry would approve of extending our agreement," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotions behind her words. "He always valued building something lasting." Pete's expression lightened with cautious hope. "To be clear, Ellie, I'm not suggesting just a business arrangement. My feelings for you have developed beyond partnership." His directness, so characteristic of the man, touched her deeply. "I'm not asking for immediate answers. Just want you to know where I stand." Eleanor rose from beside the grave, brushing pine needles from her skirt. I've known where you stand for some time. Pete Jenkins. Morning Lark saw it before I did. A smile softened her features. Apparently, she gave me special herbs for heart healing months ago, for a widow ready for a second planting season, as she put it. Pete's weathered face flushed slightly. Observant woman, he mumbled. Indeed. Eleanor took a steadying breath. I can't offer the kind of love I had with Henry. That belonged to a different time, a different woman, but I can offer honest affection, respect, and commitment to building something meaningful together. For a man of few words, Pete's expression conveyed volumes, relief, gratitude, and genuine joy, transforming his usually stoic features. That's more than enough, Ellie. More than I dared hope for. As twilight deepened around them, Eleanor made a silent farewell to Henry. Not abandonment, but acknowledgement that life continued its unstoppable forward motion. Together, she and Pete walked back toward the cabin where Rebecca waited, unaware that their partnership had just expanded beyond business considerations. Tomorrow would bring the Wintu Council's decision about their proposed forest management agreement. Beyond that loomed the sawmill's first operational test, negotiations with Harrington's Development Association, and countless other challenges of frontier enterprise. But tonight, Eleanor Wilson had taken another step in her remarkable transformation. From vulnerable widow to architect of her own destiny, finding not just security, but genuine happiness in this wilderness that had nearly broken her. Trinity Valley had taken much from her, but it had given back in unexpected ways, through the protection of unlikely allies, through opportunities created from necessity, through the healing that comes from purposeful work and meaningful connection. As the first stars appeared above the darkening pines, Eleanor felt a deep sense of rightness in the path that had emerged from tragedy. Not the life she had envisioned when following Henry westward, but one uniquely her own, shaped by grief and determination, by frontier pragmatism and unexpected grace. Autumn painted Trinity Valley in brilliant hues of crimson and gold as the first anniversary of Henry's death approached. Eleanor stood on the newly constructed loading dock of Wilson's sawmill, watching workers stack fresh-cut lumber onto a wagon bound for Riversbend. The business had flourished beyond even their most optimistic projections, with orders now coming from as far as Sacramento. What had begun as a desperate widow's struggle for survival had transformed into a thriving enterprise that employed 8 permanent workers and provided seasonal income for several Wintu families. The partnership with the native tribe had proven more successful than anyone anticipated. Following the council's approval of Eleanor's forest management proposal, the Wintu had become invaluable allies in sustainable harvesting practices. Their intimate knowledge of the forest ecosystem guided cutting patterns that maintained wildlife corridors and protected watershed integrity while still yielding quality timber. In return, the tribe received not just a percentage of profits, but also guaranteed access to traditional territories that might otherwise have been lost to encroaching settlement. Final shipments ready for Clear Creek, announced Pete, approaching, with the satisfied expression that had become increasingly common as their venture succeeded. Marriage had softened some of his frontier roughness without diminishing his practical nature. Their wedding 3 months earlier had been a simple affair conducted by a traveling minister, with Rebecca as witness and several Wintu representatives. In attendance, a union of cultures that symbolized the unique community developing around Pinecrest Gulch. Eleanor nodded approval as she reviewed the shipping manifest. Samuel's sending word that the schoolhouse committee wants to discuss a special order for interior finishing. Apparently, our reputation for quality has impressed even those initial skeptics. Pete chuckled, remembering the doubtful expressions that had greeted their first deliveries to Riversbend. Amazing how quickly attitudes change when you prove yourself reliable, Speaking of proving ourselves, Thomas Blackwell's back in the valley, brought 2 government officials with him this time. The news captured Eleanor's full attention. Since his initial visit as an unofficial scout for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Blackwell had returned several times, documenting the evolving relationship between the sawmill operation and the Wintu tribe. His reports, he'd admitted privately to Eleanor, had generated significant interest in Washington among reformers seeking alternatives to the cycle of conflict and forced relocation that characterized so much of Indian policy. Did he say what they want? Eleanor asked, already anticipating complications. Government interest, while potentially beneficial for protecting the Wintu's position, inevitably brought bureaucratic entanglements. Wants to bring them here tomorrow. Seems they're considering our arrangement as a model for other regions. Pete's expression conveyed mixed feelings about this development. Running Eagle should be informed. This affects the tribe more directly than us. Eleanor agreed, dispatching one of their Wintu workers with a message for the chief. The tribal leader's advancing age had recently limited his travel, with Swift Arrow increasingly handling interactions with the sawmill operation. Nevertheless, for a matter of this significance, Running Eagle's wisdom would be essential. The following day brought not just Blackwell and his government companions, but an unexpected visitor. Victor Dawson rode into the clearing shortly after noon, his once immaculate appearance now bearing the weathered look of a man who had survived frontier hardships without conquering them. Eleanor tensed at the sight of her former tormentor, but curiosity overcame her initial impulse to send him away. Mrs. Jenkins, Dawson greeted her with forced cordiality and the bitter emphasis on her new surname. Or do you still prefer Wilson professionally? Your reputation has spread considerably since our last encounter. Either name serves well enough, Eleanor replied coolly. What brings you to Pinecrest after all this time, Mr. Dawson? I understood. The Klamath diggings had proven profitable for you. A shadow crossed his features. Fortune comes and goes in gold country. The Mercers struck it moderately rich and returned east. My own luck proved less consistent. He glanced toward the bustling sawmill operation with barely concealed envy. It appears you found the true mother lode, one that doesn't require constant panning and praying. Before Eleanor could respond, Blackwell's party arrived, the frontiersman accompanied by 2 distinguished-looking gentlemen in travel-worn but quality attire. Introductions revealed them as Martin Coleman, Assistant Commissioner for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and Dr. James Whitfield, a Harvard-educated ethnologist documenting native traditions throughout California. Dawson's presence created an awkward dynamic as the officials expressed interest in touring the operation and meeting with tribal representatives. Eleanor briefly considered asking him to leave, but decided his witnessing the results of the cooperation he had once threatened might serve a purpose. With Pete guiding the visitors through the technical aspects of the sawmill, Eleanor led them toward the eastern section of the property, where several Wintu families maintained a seasonal camp during harvest operations. Swift Arrow met them at the camp's edge, his dignified bearing capturing the officials' attention immediately. Though he now spoke serviceable English, he deliberately used a translator for the formal meeting, a reminder that communication across cultural boundaries required mutual effort rather than unilateral adaptation. The discussion that followed revealed the government's genuine interest in the Pinecrest model. Coleman expressed particular fascination with the economic partnership aspects. The prevailing wisdom holds that natives contribute to frontier economies primarily as laborers, if at all, he observed. Your approach elevates them to stakeholders with specific expertise and territorial rights, quite revolutionary in practice. Swift Arrow responded with characteristic directness. Not revolutionary to recognize mutual benefit. Revolutionary only because most white operations see only taking, not exchanging. Win-2 survive because we adapt without surrendering who we are. Dr. Whitfield's questions focused on how traditional knowledge informed sustainable forestry practices, the specific techniques that maintained ecosystem health while allowing for commercial harvesting. Eleanor explained their rotating section, approach, and selective cutting methods, crediting the Win-2's generational understanding of forest dynamics. Throughout this exchange, Eleanor noticed Dawson's expression shifting from skeptical dismissal to reluctant interest. The man who had once threatened her life for access to gold now witnessed a more substantial wealth being generated through cooperation rather than exploitation. When the formal tour concluded, Dawson approached Eleanor privately as the officials continued their discussions with Swift Arrow. "I underestimated you," he admitted with evident difficulty. "Saw only a vulnerable widow, not someone capable of building all this." Eleanor studied him, searching for the manipulative charm that had once masked his predatory nature. Instead, she found something resembling genuine reflection. Not redemption, perhaps, but recognition. People are often more than they appear. At first glance, Mr. Dawson. That includes you, I suspect. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Kind assessment from someone I threatened to displace. He gestured toward the thriving operation around them. Any chance your enterprise might need someone with commercial experience, Sacramento connections? I find myself at something of a crossroads. The request astonished Eleanor. That Dawson would seek employment from the woman he had once terrorized demonstrated how dramatically their fortunes had reversed. Part of her savored the poetic justice. Another part recognized the same desperate determination she had felt after losing everything. We maintain hiring standards that include trustworthiness and respect for our Win-2 partners, she replied carefully. Those aren't negotiable. But I believe in second chances, Mr. Dawson. Talk to Mr. Jenkins about our Sacramento distribution needs. If he finds you suitable, I won't object to a probationary arrangement. Relief flooded his features, the reaction of a man who had exhausted other options. I appreciate the consideration, Mrs. Jenkins, truly. That evening, as government officials conferred with tribal representatives in a specially arranged council, Eleanor found quiet moment alone on the porch of what had evolved from a crude cabin into a comfortable home. Rebecca joined her, having recently returned from Sacramento, where she had been negotiating expanded markets for their lumber. Quite a collection of visitors today, Rebecca observed, settling beside her sister-in-law. Government men, tribal leaders, and did I actually see Victor Dawson speaking with Pete by the lumber shed? Eleanor smiled. Life takes unexpected turns. Dawson's seeking employment with us, if you can believe it. Rebecca's eyebrows rose. The man who tried to steal your claim? I'm not sure whether that's Christian forgiveness or frontier pragmatism at work. Perhaps a measure of both, Eleanor admitted. His Sacramento connections could prove valuable as we expand, and keeping potential trouble close at hand has certain advantages. They sat in companionable silence, watching twilight soften the outlines of the sawmill and surrounding forest. 5 seasons had passed since Henry's death. 5 seasons of transformation, struggle, and ultimately triumph. The wilderness that had nearly broken Eleanor had instead tempered her, revealing strengths she hadn't known she possessed. Henry would hardly recognize this place, Rebecca mused, echoing Eleanor's thoughts. Though I think he'd approve of what you've built. What we've built, Eleanor corrected gently, including not just Rebecca, but the entire unlikely community that had formed around Pinecrest Gulch. Pete, with his technical expertise, the Win-2 with their forest wisdom, the workers who had found steady employment outside the boom and bust cycle of gold mining. As stars appeared above Trinity Valley, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment of prosperity and purpose. Widowed by the gold rush, hunted by claim jumpers, saved by an unexpected alliance, each crisis had become a turning point rather than an ending. The gold that had indirectly claimed Henry's life had proven less valuable than the human connections formed in adversity's crucible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Government policies to navigate, markets to develop, balances to maintain between growth and sustainability. But Eleanor Wilson Jenkins faced these prospects not as a vulnerable widow, but as the architect of an enterprise that offered a different vision for California's future, one built on cooperation rather than exploitation, on recognizing mutual interests across cultural divides, on creating lasting value rather than extracting temporary wealth. As Pete joined them on the porch, slipping his hand comfortably into hers, Eleanor felt a profound gratitude for the unexpected path that had led her through grief to purpose, through isolation to community, through fear to strength. Trinity Valley had taken her husband, but given her a future she could never have imagined when first arriving as a dressmaker's wife with delicate hands and limited horizons. The serpentine pendant Greyhawk had given her still hung around her neck, a tangible reminder that she had learned to listen to the land, to hear wisdom from unexpected sources, to put down roots that would sustain not just her life, but generations to follow. In a California transformed by gold fever, Eleanor had discovered a different kind of wealth, one measured not in ounces, but in relationships, not in claims, but in commitment to a place and its people. As night settled fully over Pinecrest Gulch, the sawmill stood as a testament to what determination, cooperation, and vision could accomplish in even the most challenging circumstances. Eleanor Wilson Jenkins had not merely survived widowhood and threat, she had pioneered a path that others might follow, demonstrating that even in the rawness of the frontier, humanity's higher possibilities could take root and flourish. Next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.